One bomb. 2,000 pounds of steel and explosive force. Enough raw power to erase an entire building from existence. But the true secret wasn't what it destroyed. It was how it was built, layer by layer, until it became the most devastating conventional weapon of World War II. This is the inside story of the bomb that changed everything. A factory in Pennsylvania, 1943. Midnight. A cold wind sweeps across the blacked-out industrial district as the night shift arrives. Workers step through the doors one by one, stamping snow from their boots, filing into a warehouse where the air is kept at exactly 68 degrees Fahrenheit. Not 69. Not 67. That precise temperature could mean the difference between life and death. On the factory floor, lying on a wheeled cradle, sits a steel shell nearly 10 feet long. Empty. Hollow. Waiting. By sunrise, that hollow cylinder will become a weapon powerful enough to blast through a reinforced German U-boat pen buried beneath 20 feet of concrete. But right now, it's just cold steel. What happens in the next 12 hours is one of the most dangerous, precise, and secretive manufacturing processes ever attempted. Because building a 2,000-pound bomb isn't about pouring explosives into a case and hoping it works. It's chemistry, physics, patience, timing, and one wrong move means everyone in this building dies instantly. The foreman checks his clipboard with a grim familiarity. He has overseen the creation of 847 of these bombs. He has witnessed 3 fatal accidents. He has seen entire work shifts evacuated when a batch of explosive went unstable. He knows that what they are about to attempt is as close to controlled insanity as manufacturing gets. But there's a war on. Bombers need ordnance, and this factory will deliver, no matter the cost. The process begins with the casing. The steel shell isn't ordinary metal. It's a specialized alloy forged under extreme heat and pressure, engineered to survive a drop from 20,000 feet and the violent deceleration of impact. Too hard, and it shatters on contact. Too soft, and it fails to penetrate concrete. Achieving that perfect balance took years of testing and cost the lives of dozens of test pilots whose bombs detonated prematurely or failed altogether. The casing arrives pre-shaped, a long cylindrical body with a thick nose and a tapered tail, and even empty, it weighs 400 pounds. Every inch of it has been X-rayed for cracks, inspected for microscopic flaws, tested again and again. A hairline defect could cause the bomb to rupture mid-flight, killing an entire bomber crew before the enemy ever fired a shot. But the steel case is only the beginning. The real complexity lies in what goes inside. Workers wearing thick rubber gloves and face shields carry buckets toward the open tail end of the bomb. To a casual observer, the buckets might look like they're filled with wet sand. But inside is Amatol, a mixture of ammonium nitrate and TNT. This is the base charge, the foundation layer. It will provide more than half of the bomb's total explosive power. But Amatol is unstable. Moisture can break it down. Temperature swings can cause it to crystallize. Static electricity can detonate it instantly. That's why the factory's floor is grounded. Why workers wear shoes with non-conductive soles. Why metal tools are banned. Every tool in the room is wood or rubber. The first worker tilts his bucket, letting the heavy, paste-like mixture ooze into the bomb's interior. Another worker follows with a wooden paddle, spreading it evenly, pressing it into the inner walls to eliminate air pockets. Air pockets are deadly. Trapped air can cause the explosive to detonate asymmetrically, reducing its power or causing a misfire. For 2 hours, it continues, pouring, spreading, packing. The Amatol grows layer by layer until the entire interior is coated in 4 inches of explosive. But they're far from finished. Although Amatol is powerful, It's not enough to break the newest German fortifications. Allied engineers needed something stronger. Something that didn't just explode, something that detonated with brutal precision. A supervisor wheels in a cart carrying metal cylinders marked with glaring red warning labels. Inside them is RDX, one of the most powerful explosives ever created, strong enough to rip through submarine pens and concrete bunkers. And dangerously sensitive. A hot day can make it spontaneously detonate. Even a spark can ignite it. Which is why the RDX is stored in a separate building half a mile away, why the factory temperature never wavers, and why only 2 workers are permitted near it at any time. When the dangerous cargo enters the room, everyone else steps back. The worker opens a cylinder, revealing a pale yellow powder that looks deceptively harmless. He mixes it with wax to reduce sensitivity, kneads it like dough, shapes it into a disc the size of a dinner plate. This disc is the bomb's heart. This RDX core will sit at the center of the Amatol. When triggered, it will release a shock wave traveling at 27,000 feet per second, so fast it compresses the surrounding Amatol into instantaneous detonation. The resulting blast is exponentially more powerful than either explosive alone. It's the secret behind the bomb's bunker-penetrating power. The worker lowers the RDX disc into the casing and checks its position 3 times. If it's even half an inch off-center, the entire detonation will be uneven, and the bomb will lose half its penetrating force. Satisfied at last, he steps away. Now comes the fuse assembly, the part most people think is simple, yet is anything but. A bomb dropped from 4 miles up, hurtling downward at more than 300 miles per hour, can't simply explode on impact. It needs to know when to explode. Too early, and its energy is wasted in the air. Too late, and the blast is muffled underground. It needs precision, intelligence, timing. A fuse small enough to fit in your palm, but engineered like a Swiss watch. The fuse is installed in the bomb's nose. Inside it are gears, springs, a tiny propeller that spins as the bomb falls, a barometric sensor that reads air pressure, an impact pin, and a clockwork delay mechanism. The fuse won't arm until the bomb has dropped at least 500 feet, a vital safety feature for the aircrew. A technician threads it carefully into place. One cross-threaded turn and the bomb becomes a live, unstable device. Sweat beads on his forehead despite the cold air. When he finishes, he marks the casing with chalk. Another layer complete. But the weapon still lacks one final component, the arming wire. A thin cable hardly thicker than a guitar string. It connects the fuse to the bomb rack inside the aircraft. When the crew releases the bomb, its weight snaps the wire. Only then does the fuse begin arming. The wire must be strong enough to survive turbulence, yet weak enough to break cleanly at release. Engineers spent months determining the perfect tensile strength. Too weak, and the bomb arms while still aboard the aircraft, a nightmare scenario that happened more than once during early experiments. Too strong, and the bomb releases without arming, becoming a useless dud. At last they settled on a braided steel wire engineered to snap at exactly 200 pounds of force. The worker threads it through, tugs gently, and marks it finished. The bomb is finally assembled. Now they paint it. It seems absurd, painting a weapon meant to blow itself apart, but the paint does more than look neat. It identifies the explosive type. It protects the casing from rust. It even improves aerodynamics, smoothing the metal surface so the bomb falls straighter and more predictably. Unpainted bombs can drift 100 feet off target. Painted ones hit with precision. After drying under heat lamps, the bomb gleams olive drab with yellow and gray bands. Ready for the final test. Before any batch leaves the factory, one bomb is chosen for the drop test. Workers call it the lottery. A crane lifts the bomb 50 feet into the air over a concrete pad. It drops. Best case, the casing survives intact. Middle case, it cracks, and the entire batch is scrapped. Worst case, the bomb detonates, killing the test crew but saving bomber crews who might have flown into battle with unstable ordnance. Today's test is a success. The casing dents but does not rupture. The batch is approved. By dawn, trucks carry 120 completed bombs from this single night's production to a nearby airfield. But why all this effort? The answer goes back to August 1942, when American bombers launched their first major daylight raid over Europe. Hundreds of bombs were dropped, and 40% were duds. They struck the ground and simply buried themselves, unexploded. German engineers recovered dozens, analyzed them, and discovered the problem: air pockets inside the explosive. Poor packing. Rushed manufacturing. The failure was catastrophic. Allied command demanded immediate fixes. Factories slowed production, doubled inspections, added new testing, compressed Amatol with hydraulic presses, and redesigned fuse systems. Bomb output dropped by 30%, but reliability skyrocketed. The dud rate fell from 40% to 2%. America's bombs became the most dependable in the world. This brings us back to that factory in Pennsylvania. The bomb rolling out the door at dawn isn't just ordnance. It's the culmination of hard lessons learned through failure and tragedy. Every layer perfect. Every component tested. Every step improved through bloodshed and innovation. Now the story shifts to combat. England, March 1944. On a cold airfield, ground crews load 4 of these bombs into the bomb bay of a B-17 Flying Fortress named Memphis Belle. The target, a ball-bearing factory deep in Germany. Destroy it, and German tank and aircraft production will grind to a halt. The crew chief threads the arming wire, tugging to make sure it holds. The bombardier checks the red-painted safety pins. The engines roar to life, and as the aircraft rolls, men running alongside pull the safety pins free. The plane lifts off and joins a formation of 300 bombers. 3 hours later, over enemy territory, black puffs of flak explode around them. Shrapnel rattles against the fuselage. A bomber in the formation takes a direct hit and spirals downward. The bombardier forces himself to focus through the icy wind leaking into the unpressurized nose compartment. The Norden bombsight, the most advanced targeting computer in the world, feeds him calculations. Altitude, speed, wind, angle. He steadies his breath. A tone sounds. Release point. He presses the trigger. 4 bombs drop. The arming wires snap. The nose propellers spin. Safeties unlock. Now alive, the bombs fall faster and faster. The first punches through the factory roof like a spear, then through floors of machinery before burying itself in the earth. 1/10 of a second later, it detonates. The blast erupts upward, tearing the factory apart. The second and third bombs hit seconds later, compounding the destruction. By the time the 4th explosion finishes, the entire complex is nothing but fire and twisted steel. But despite the devastation, 60% of the bombs dropped by the formation that day are duds. Not the Memphis Belle's, her bombs worked flawlessly, but across the fleet, fuses fail, explosives crack, impacts misalign. Engineers analyze every mission, refine every design. By the end of 1944, American bombs undergo more than 30 design revisions. By early 1945, the dud rate drops to 1%. And that is why the 2,000-pound bomb becomes the standard. Not because it's the biggest. Not because it's the most powerful. But because it works. Because air crews trust it. Because every layer, from the forged steel casing to the fused explosive core, represents a deadly balance of engineering and sacrifice. In the end, the bomb's real secret wasn't its destructive power. It was the invisible army of workers, engineers, scientists, and soldiers who perfected it piece by piece, layer by layer, until it became the most reliable explosive weapon of World War II, capable of altering the course of battles, missions, and history itself.